you're here on Earth in the third dimension, and then you're here in the outside the fourth dimension. So you're outside time here, but you're inside time here. If you die, then you go here outside time. But how can you be here outside time for all of eternity and at the same time be here constrained by time? How can you have both of these at the same time?
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Out of the Box podcast, where Steele and I, Jose, your host, get to talk about out of the box ideas. Today, we're going to be experimenting with a new way of going about the podcast. And it's actually starting off a question, and then we kind of use some logic and philosophy to dissect this question. And so, before we actually get started with this little callus that we have going on experiment, I want to invite y'all to subscribe to our channel. This is a channel that is dedicated to providing consistent content for you guys about theology, philosophy, music. Really what we're trying to get with this podcast is to bring about truth in the world and share that with other people. So we want to bring in hosts, guests who have some expertise or knowledge in a specific area and can help you grow in the specific field as well, and just become a more well-rounded person. So without further ado, Steele, do you want to introduce us into what this question is, and we'll go from there?
So last week I had a thought experiment that popped into my mind. And I was thinking, if you had a family member and a family member passed away tomorrow, let's say, and tonight their ghost, hypothetically, right? So like if they passed away tomorrow, but then their ghost visited you tonight, does that mean like their ghost traveled back in time? Or like, because we think about the spirit going in the fifth dimension or higher outside of the dimension of time. So does that just mean that the ghost goes outside time itself and so therefore is able to travel to any point in time? And if that's true, what I couldn't figure out, I can't stop thinking about it because I haven't really had time to really dive deep. But I've been thinking about this thing. Does that mean it's predetermined that the person was going to die on that very day, at that very hour, for their ghost to visit me the day before they died? Or is that even possible to begin with? Like, does that mean it's a predestined thing that there's no free will in that case? Or can free will still work when that happens? So I just haven't been able to really figure it out. It's kind of confusing. I
So what
call it
you're
the
trying
timeline
to
error.
ask is whether there's free will in death, basically.
Well, whether free will can exist at the same time that a ghost, when we die, we go outside time, outside the fourth dimension. And so that could the ghost just travel back into any point in time?
Oh, like does free will exist outside of the fourth dimension?
Yeah, kind of like that, right? Because if you think about it, if
You mean
ghosts,
like because the ghost potentially could decide to freely move or go back
yeah, because if we think that a ghost
to
is,
the to the fourth dimension?
yeah, if the ghost is outside time itself, then it's outside time. So then couldn't the ghost just travel back to whatever time it wants to? And if that can happen, then it's kind of weird. It's kind of hard to wrap your brain around because
Mm.
you have a ghost visiting you here on this day, on a Sunday, okay? And then you have Monday over here. That's when the person died and became a ghost. If the person died Monday and became a ghost, but then their ghost traveled back to Sunday, does it mean like their death was just predestined and predetermined to happen, meaning there isn't free will? Like they were gonna die on Monday no matter what because it was predestined. Because if their ghost can travel back to Sunday, that means their death must happen on Monday, or does it? I don't know. Because it's
Yeah,
it's really,
well,
I don't know.
I'm just trying to understand the question before I actually
Yeah,
start talking about it.
that's good.
Um, because I have heard of people and it's happened. I think my mom, when my grandmother was gonna pass away, she dreamt of her like a lot. And
Yeah,
then and then, then one day she woke up, she's like, yeah, I think she passed away.
So think
I
of
don't
it.
know if she just has that nature of like, I think she's very in tune with the spiritual sense of things, or I don't know, maybe
Probably
it's just
so.
like a prophetic sense.
Well,
But
that's what I'm thinking about. Like, imagine the dream is the ghost visiting you. You know, that's kind of what I mean.
and perhaps, as we talked before in a podcast previously about dreams, potentially dreams are portals to different dimensions outside of time, which therefore means that if dreams can travel outside of time, then potentially, you know, spirits are informing, or are kind of letting their relatives know, like,
Yeah,
hey,
exactly.
it's something's going to happen
But
with me.
but that means the ghost, if the ghost travels back in time, then that means the ghost existed of that person before that person died. Isn't that weird? I mean, because we think about it like
Yeah,
this,
and
someone
and
dies and then they become a ghost, but in that case, it's like the ghost was in existence before the person even died. So does that mean our ghost exists outside of us in a higher dimension
and
before we
and
even die?
potentially, like, maybe what this could be is not perhaps the ghost, but just the sheer fact of something happening, like more of a prophetic like situation, rather than like an actual spirit going back in time.
More complicated. Well,
It's almost maybe like I'm predicting like an actual situation happening, like in time, like in the timeline of, time of time, our timeline in this universe.
our dimension.
Potentially, they could foresee something happening, but perhaps their spirit itself was not the one informing,
It was something else.
the seer.
And I think that's definitely a possibility. But what I'm also thinking about is like let's say
Well, like, for example,
I
like the
die.
apparitions of like, there's been several apparitions from people, and not only that, but there has been a couple of accounts of, like, for example, in the Catholic Church, of apparitions happening from, spirits, like holy spirits, or even sometimes demonic spirits too,
Mhm.
uh not only tormenting during the dreams, but also showing up in person,
Oh yeah,
right?
that's
And
scary.
so potentially, um spirits are probably not withheld from time, so they're not constrained to time. That's the word.
That's what I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around because like if I died, let's say I died tomorrow or something, right? And then I become a ghost. But then I decide when I'm a ghost that I'm going to travel back in time to haunt myself, you know? But that's a contradiction because how can I be a ghost? Like if I haunted myself right now as a ghost, how can I be a ghost right now if I die, if I do not die and become a ghost until tomorrow? That's the part I have a hard time understanding because it just and that's another question, like, does free will exist outside of the fourth dimension? Because if you go outside the fourth dimension or outside time, so you can go anywhere, so how does free will function? It's weird. You know what I mean? We
Yeah,
talked about that before, like going outside the fourth dimension, like that means all of time is laid out in front of you, the past, the present, and the future all at once. So how does free will function if you're outside of time itself? That's very hard to understand for me. And that's what, yeah, I don't know.
yeah, but potentially, I mean, if the case was that, as a ghost, you could travel back in time, meaning that you could see yourself
When you're still alive,
when you're still alive,
it's weird.
right? Because I mean, it's like, I'm guessing, I don't know the reality of it, but I'm guessing, if you were to unfold the timeline and you could see like the timeline of history from beginning to end, you could say like, I'm gonna go visit,
Yeah,
myself in this timeline. That would be interesting.
that'd be
I
weird.
mean,
'Cause you're both
and I wonder why there is still ghost on Earth. at a specific time,
That's
like during this time.
true. That's a mystery, isn't it? That is.
Because I mean, people do have accounts of like supernatural experiences happening. Of course, maybe there's superstitions about it, but there has been cases of spirits do show up, and there is a spiritual world that we live in. And so I wonder why some spirits, are stuck, here, right? Like they're
That's
stuck in on earth, which could be a like potentially a purgatory, or it could potentially be a hell for them. I
yeah.
don't know, maybe they just couldn't the spirits were to couldn't let go of the earth, couldn't
Yeah.
let go of the material, and so their spirit stayed on
No
earth.
closure, not
It
having.
didn't Yeah, there was no closure to their story, to what they wanted to accomplish,
Yeah.
and so they feel the need to stay here to mourn or to finish what they had in life started,
What do you
right?
think
Because
about, like, some religions actually believe that there are no ghosts that stay on Earth. Some other denominations of Christianity. I just recently found this out actually, and I researched a little bit of it online. I just found out that certain denominations of Christianity believe that all of those ghosts that we see, the apparitions, they're all demonic spirits. They're all fallen angels. That they're all just trying to deceive us, and that they're not our loved ones. That our loved ones either go straight to heaven or straight to hell, and there's no like other
in
option.
between,
But not
yeah,
everyone believes that, and I don't even know if I believe that. I think because I've been raised Catholic, so I believe there's a purgatory, a hell, and a heaven, and I think that I've had experiences of spirits on Earth, so at the Donkey Bridge. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know for sure. Now I'm like in a state where I'm still trying to figure it out. So I was just kind of wondering what you thought about that. Like the
yeah.
idea that they're not actually not our loved ones, that they're just demons trying to trick us. I mean, I don't know. You know, maybe for some of them, I don't know.
It's an interesting point to kind of bring up because potentially, how can we decipher it?
Yeah,
I
that's what.
mean, we would have to be, for example, seers, but how is it that some seers who do see ghosts are able to see holy ghost?
And it can be actually, yeah, it can be Holy Ghost too, like angels.
Yeah,
But it's just like it can't. They're
they
saying it's
can't
not.
be like actual human
Yeah,
beings
not
or what?
human beings. Yeah, exactly.
Because yeah, that's interesting. I mean, there has been healings of people, for example, like going back to the saints, there has been healings from saints after death. People ask for intercession from a specific person, and there was a healing that happened. And so in order to be canonized a saint, there has to be like a certain amount of actual counts of healing or like miracles happening from that person. So they can't just be canonized because they lived a holy life. Um, there has to be like something more to their story, and so there has to be some supernatural accounts that happen, and they have to be notated
They're
by the family or by the person that it happened. And so which means that you know they were also humans,
right.
they were human beings. I mean, even I mean, if they're Christian too, like even Jesus became human. So
He came back after the resurrection, and
yeah, he came back.
that's interesting.
So I
Actually,
mean,
that
yes,
actually
we can
that's
say the
uh,
the fact that he is also God, right? And maybe that
oh,
could
that's
be a
true.
thought.
Like
It's like, oh well, he's God, he can do whatever.
spirit too. I mean,
Yeah, he's the Holy Spirit. But I mean, I think I go back to that idea of like those miracles. I mean,
that's
of course, it's harder. It's harder to debate that because
there's
like not everyone probably believes in that.
yeah,
Um,
we're limited.
but
To what we know we can go to the Bible, of course, but that's another option. But the other thing is like if we believe that spirits exist, that when we die, we go somewhere to a higher dimension through our spirit, which I have come to believe and think of as our consciousness continuing to exist after death, that our consciousness is not just a material illusion from the brain, but it's something greater. It's something else entirely. It's another substance, entity, whatever. We don't understand it. If we believe consciousness can exist after death, then I could see how it would certainly be possible for consciousness to continue to stay on Earth if it wanted to, or if it couldn't find a way to go to this other dimension of heaven or hell or purgatory. And I could see that being a possibility if we think of consciousness in that way, like that it just stays here on Earth and it appears manifests as a spiritual, what we think of as a spirit, and that's just how it works because it's something that we don't fully understand, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
And you know what, like it's interesting that you mentioned consciousness, because in the theological sense of words, we have, our body, right? Humans are composed of three things: our body, our consciousness, or our soul, right? Which is the theological sense, and then the spirit, which is associated with the heart, right? The emotions. And so our spirit is the internal part, which is sometimes, they have this theological aspect of the spirit or the emotions fighting with the body, right? Because there's it's like, no, you have to do like everything to strive for spirituality, and then the body is like, no, and I want to have sex, I want to eat everything, I want to blah blah blah, and so the consciousness is what keeps things in check, right? The soul.
Right,
um and so the fact of the consciousness existing outside of time is not something that's just now, but the idea of the soul existing outside of time has been for ages. I mean,
yeah,
it's what the Catholic Church teaches.
eternal.
Um, yeah, the eternal, your soul going to eternity. And
It's
so
actually
it's basically the same um idea, just with different words, but the consciousness is the
exactly that.
soul existing outside in in
Yeah,
in eternity.
how we talked about different words, like the Bible used different words and theologians use different words, but they all mean like the same thing. I think we're
Yeah.
talking about the same thing. It's just we have different words and stuff like that. But if the soul is eternal, then that means the soul has existed since the beginning and end of time. Because if the soul goes outside, the minute or whatever second that the soul goes outside the fourth dimension of time is the minute that the soul automatically exists from beginning to end of everything. So that means, and it feels like a contradiction because it's like, how can our soul exist here on earth in the third dimension and be a finite thing until we die? But then also when we die, it goes outside of the fourth dimension and becomes something that has always and always will exist. How can those two things exist at the same time? And I think that sums up my whole argument because my whole argument is this: if you're here on Earth in the third dimension, and then you're here in the outside the fourth dimension, so you're outside time here, but you're inside time here. If you die, then you go here outside time. But how can you be here outside time for all of eternity and at the same time be here constrained by time? How can you have both of these at the same time? It's kind of feels like a contradiction, but I also recognize that it's something we do not fully understand. So, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like you exist for all eternity when you die, from beginning till end. That encompasses this whole third dimension of forever. And but then you also exist in the third dimension, constrained by time at the same time. How
Hmm.
is these how are they existing at the same? It's
Yeah.
weird, you know?
I what if what we hear as thoughts of inspiration or murmur, like voices, sometimes voices could be our spiritual self in the future telling us now, like what we could foresee or prevent or do. So it's almost like that question that we were talking about childhood, like what would we tell our younger self to do,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And potentially think about this, maybe the soul it's interesting. I mean, because we were just talking about souls that don't that stay without closure, and so those perhaps maybe never get to see the full timeline. But what if, what if, like, if you do have closure after, like, before death, like everything is closed, I mean, you're forgiven, whatever needs to be done to have closure, like you're given money and helped and blah blah blah, and you have closure. What if dying, it you don't want to go back, like, because you're completely satisfied with what you lived. And so if you've had closure, you can live in eternity and see your timeline from eternity,
Oh,
and not want to touch it, because
yeah.
potentially if you did touch it or moved it, perhaps you wouldn't exist in eternity.
Oh, that's weird, Like when it's hard to wrap your head around
It's
too.
almost like the Back to the Future kind of idea,
Yeah,
of like where he starts messing with the timeline, and then he starts to disappear, because if his parents didn't get to know each other, he wouldn't have existed. And so he starts disappearing because, you know, if they don't fall in love, then Marty, never lived.
exactly. And that's a weird contradiction too, when you think about it. Like,
So maybe like in eternity, since they have closure already, they're like, well, why do I want to go back in time?
yeah, why would I
And
want to
so
change?
and so perhaps the souls in purgatory, the souls in purgatory, maybe Earth is the purgatory, and they have to
That's what I was
figure
thinking.
out closure, but they can't go to that big timeline where you can see all
Yeah,
in eternity, where you can
absolutely.
see everything, and so
Right.
you wouldn't be able to go talk to your old self to try to change things, right? You yourself made those decisions that led up to unclosure. I don't know. It's
Yeah,
a thought, right? It's a train
that's
of thought.
interesting. And yeah, I think that who knows, and does your soul determine where you go when you die? Does the state of your soul and what you believe about yourself, whether you believe you lived a good life or a bad life, draw you in one direction or the other? So if like I think I lived a bad life and I did bad things, will my soul naturally drive me, my spirit of my soul drive me to hell because I think that's where I belong? Or because then I also hear near death experiences of people going to hell and then they ask for Jesus' help and then Jesus comes to them and then takes them out of hell. So I do believe that Jesus still plays a role. I'm not saying he doesn't, but I'm also trying to figure out if somehow our consciousness after death also plays some role in like, oh, I feel guilty, so I can't go to heaven. So I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna stay on earth. Or because I feel guilty, I don't deserve to go to heaven. Or worse, I think I deserve to go to hell, so I'm gonna go to hell. And like it's almost an unconscious thing that happens. You're not trying to do it on purpose, or maybe you're doing it on purpose too. I don't know. Either way, Jesus still has the final like say, I think. But
Yeah.
I'm
And
trying
you
to
know what? It's so interesting that we're talking about this, because the Bible talks about, how do I get to heaven, right? And a lot of people ask Jesus during his life, like, how do I get to heaven? How do I get to the kingdom of God? And a lot of, there was the aspect of, you need to believe and you need to take action. And so if we start looking at human psychology, if you believe something, your actions correlate with what you believe,
right.
right? So you won't, I mean, the frame of viewing the world is shaped by your beliefs, right? So you have a frame of reference, perspective on how you see the world, and then based on that framework that you have of what the world means and what is possible, you take actions based on that, right? So it's a both and kind of deal, right? You need and Jesus explained this. He's like, no, you need beliefs and you need, I think it was St. Paul who said you need to take action as well. um but it's so interesting, because what does the Catholic Church say about people who don't believe, who
Yeah,
don't
that's right.
believe in Jesus? so it actually says, and I learned this in my catechism class, that people who are non-believers, after death, they exist in a limbo,
Ah,
what they call a limbo. And so potentially, because they don't know of a heaven, they live perhaps in a state which is, I mean, I would have to define limbo for you to
yeah.
understand. I mean, that was my
Oh, yeah, like purgatory.
back in seventh grade or something like that
Yeah,
when they taught me that.
it sounds like
But
purgatory almost.
it sounds like it, but it was. I would have to look deeper into it because I don't want to say something that comes out of context. But I do remember my teacher mentioning that they do exist in a limbo state, which is not hell, but not heaven either.
Right.
Um, so potentially could be, but I don't know if it's purgatory either.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's a mystery, and I
What
know
is
some.
limbo, right? Because
I know some denominations of Christianity believe that if you don't accept Jesus as your savior, if you don't believe in him, that you go to hell even, like they go a step farther. So different religions and different denominations believe different things. And I'm over
yeah,
here, I'm just trying to figure it out, I
because imagine this, if let's say there was a Muslim or an atheist
right.
who did did not believe in Jesus or did not believe in salvation, you know, then where do then in that case, let's say with the atheist, but they were ethical, they did good, they loved their family, they raised good kids, you know, they didn't kill anyone, um, and they did good for the community.
Mm,
So they end up in this limbo state, right?
right.
Because imagine this, like what you were saying was so interesting. Like, what if you believed that you were going to go to heaven,
Uh,
and you do, but what if you believed that you weren't going to go to heaven and then you don't? I mean, perhaps we're looking too deeply into it and bashing ourselves with the idea that heaven is unattainable because we are imperfect. Therefore, the the possibility of going to heaven is unreachable, right? Because you need to reach perfection in order to get there.
right.
But what if, you know, when it says you need to believe, it meant literally you need to just believe for forever,
It
forever
could
that
be,
you're going to
no,
go.
it
And with
could
the belief, your
yeah,
consciousness believes that, and
exactly.
therefore, which is your soul, your consciousness is the soul. And so therefore your soul goes to heaven because the
Yes,
belief
exactly.
and the consciousness are both aligned with the direction that it wants to go in.
Yeah, I wondered about that too. Like I really do wonder that because it makes sense, like the Bible says it, right? The Bible even supports it, like because the Bible said if you believe, then this is where you will go, and not just like the afterlife, but other things too. The Bible often says if you believe strongly enough, then this will happen, right? And doors will open and stuff like that. So like maybe you're right, like consciousness and the soul and the spirit have to be aligned and work together. But if you don't have that belief, even in the tiniest doubt, then maybe it messes that path up and you don't, And I think particularly like when you die, I think that does what you're saying makes sense. Like your consciousness can direct you this way or that way and based on what you believe. So if someone doesn't believe in God, then their soul isn't gonna direct them to heaven. It's just it wouldn't even make sense, even if from a scientific perspective, if let's say science was like, okay, consciousness can exist after death or something, right? And then there's these higher dimensions. There's a paradise higher dimension like heaven, then there's like a hellish one. So like you could argue that consciousness will go where it believes it should go because consciousness works differently than things here on earth. So it's like a floating ball of consciousness and it just goes where it based on its feelings and its beliefs. And so it makes sense that if you don't believe you're gonna go to heaven, then it wouldn't go to that dimension. It would go to a different one. So I think, yeah, what you're saying definitely makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, but what are your final like kind of thoughts about all this? Like, like what do you think?
I mean, I just think it's so interesting that you were thinking of the fact of the soul or consciousness traveling in time, which it already does through dreams, right? It already does it, but
Agrees.
it existing out of free will, because when you dream, you don't necessarily have a free will of what you want to dream of that night.
Only if you're
You
lucid.
can't, or potentially if you lucid dream,
Yeah,
which could be a portal to understand afterlife.
could be. And some people
Could be the fact that lucid dreaming could be the way to understand afterlife and what the soul can do,
yeah, I think
which is
that's what
potentially create your utopia, right?
exactly. Yeah, that's true. Maybe
So potentially you could create, because there's this movie, I can't remember what it's called. I think it was Robin Williams. But he dies, and
oh yeah,
he has like paintbrushes, and he's
oh
creating
yes.
like his own like paradise.
Yeah,
And so I wonder if, that idea of creating your paradise, you could form different paradises
that's
amongst other people.
yeah, that's
You almost have like unlimited resources to create your own home, right? In
right.
heaven.
I was in my book, I was a theory that I was thinking about that book about God that I was working on. A theory that I was thinking about, it reminds me of is what if we create our own heaven or our own hell in the afterlife? Because the brain, when it dies, it loses the five senses, so it has to fill in the gap of perception and create a new world outside of it because consciousness doesn't die. So then you just create your own afterlife based on how you feel that where you should go. And you can create a hell for yourself if you think you did bad, even an unconscious level, or you can create a heaven for yourself if you think unconsciously that you did good.
Yeah.
So that would explain why people who don't believe, you know, experience nothing. But I don't know that. I actually haven't. That's not even true because I've researched a lot of near-death experiences, and even people who are atheists went somewhere after they died, whether it was hell or heaven. So that's not technically based on
So
the
it could
course.
it could be potentially that these this paradise or this hell does exist, or you can't, it's not something you can make up. It's already built. It's already created.
Exactly.
However, it satisfies everything that your consciousness needs to fill in the gaps,
Yeah, maybe so.
you
It's a bit,
know?
you know.
And perhaps the biggest hell is not being able to fulfill those gaps. Uh, and so
Yeah,
the consciousness is never satisfied. And perhaps that could be what the unclosure that like some souls in on earth have, perhaps.
yeah. Who knows? I mean, this is an interesting topic. Like, it's opening up a lot of doors. I feel like of
Yeah,
possible ideas. But yeah, I'm gonna I'm gonna go dream tonight and dream about all this stuff. No, I'm
nice.
joking. No, but yeah, you know what I mean. But yeah, what
Yeah.
any final like ideas or
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool that to think about this. I mean, I know you had told me that there's accounts of people dying and they have either similar or really almost identical uh you know experiences of what heaven or what they experienced in the afterlife
yeah,
and come back to life. And I think it's just interesting to know that there's another world outside of this world, which makes you think and actually reflect, well, if there's another world after this world, then what does this world mean?
yeah,
What
what's
does
it
this universe mean?
exactly?
And And if what you do in this life is to prepare for the next life, how do you prepare for that? And
Yeah,
that's a question that I guess religions
for
have
sure.
have always tried to decipher.
Yeah,
What do you do in the next life? Because the idea of next life is, you know, for some people, they believe in reincarnation,
yeah,
right? So what you do in this life will help you in your next life. And so potentially, the idea of traveling into another life, like you exist outside of this fourth dimension,
yeah, exactly.
that idea is so interesting. It's kind of mind-boggling.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah.
What about you, Stu? Any last thoughts? Any last ideas?
Well, I mean, I don't know, I can't remember if I told you or not through text, but I want to start. Well, this whole thing has made me really want to start researching time by reading a lot of different books about it, and so my goal is to start really diving deeper into understanding all of the different perspectives on time, not just religion, but neuroscience and physics and everything. So that's my goal. I'm gonna try to do that over the next year or so. So
Nice. Sounds good. Well, thank you guys for watching this podcast. We really appreciate your time. And if you found something interesting, please let us know down below in the comment section. We really like to hear what your thoughts are. And also don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hopefully you can dream about subscribing to our channel.
yeah.
And we will talk to y'all soon. Take care.